wake up tired even after a full night of sleep. Your brain feels foggy, your energy crashes during the day, you crave sugar constantly, and your belly fat refuses to go away no matter how carefully you eat. And the strangest part is that your blood tests may still look almost normal, but your body still feels inflamed, exhausted, and metabolically unstable. As an endocrinologist, I can tell you that very often the real problem is not simply calories, aging, or lack of discipline. The problem may be chronic systemic inflammation. This is one of the most overlooked processes in modern health because chronic inflammation affects nearly everything. Your cortisol levels, your insulin sensitivity, your thyroid function, your appetite, your sleep, your energy, your blood vessels, your metabolism, and even the speed at which your body ages. And the most dangerous part is that many people live with this inflammation for years without realizing it because chronic inflammation does not always feel like a disease. Very often it feels like normal aging, constant stress, or simply being tired all the time. But inside the body, a completely different process is happening. Elevated cortisol, insulin resistance, immune system overactivation, blood vessel damage, and accelerated biological aging. And today I'm going to show you 7 foods that may help reduce chronic inflammation naturally from an endocrinology and metabolic health perspective. We'll talk about how inflammation affects your hormones, why it increases belly fat, what it does to your pancreas, how your gut influences your immune system, and why certain foods may help lower inflammatory stress on the body. This is not a detox. This is not a magic cleanse. And this is not pseudoscientific wellness advice. We're going to talk about real physiology, real metabolism, and mechanisms supported by scientific research. Make sure you stay until the end because at the end of this video, I'll show you a simple anti-inflammatory nutrition principle that may help reduce inflammation without extreme diets or restriction. And right now, hit like and subscribe. On this channel, we break down the real science behind hormones, metabolism, healthy aging, and longevity in simple language. Let's get started. When people hear the word inflammation, they usually imagine something obvious like pain, infection, fever, or injury. But chronic systemic inflammation works very differently. It is not an acute process. It is a slow, low-grade, constant activation of the immune system. And the problem is that modern lifestyle habits continuously feed this inflammation every single day. Poor sleep, chronic stress, ultra-processed food, blood sugar spikes, visceral fat, and lack of movement all create stress signals inside the body. Over time, the body begins functioning in a constant state of biological stress. Research has linked chronic inflammation to insulin resistance, obesity, cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, muscle loss, neurodegeneration, and accelerated aging. This is why many people experience brain fog, constant fatigue, poor recovery, sugar cravings, and unstable energy even when they technically do not have a disease. And this is where endocrinology becomes extremely important because inflammation directly affects hormones. Here's the mechanism that almost nobody explains correctly. When inflammatory stress increases inside the body, stress hormones also increase. One of the most important hormones involved here is cortisol. Now, cortisol itself is not bad. The problem begins when cortisol stays elevated chronically because high cortisol reduces insulin sensitivity, promotes belly fat accumulation, disrupts sleep, increases cravings, and may worsen inflammation even further. This creates a vicious cycle. Inflammation raises cortisol, high cortisol damages metabolism, and damaged metabolism fuels more inflammation. Then insulin starts suffering as well. Cells become less responsive to insulin, the pancreas has to produce more insulin, blood sugar becomes unstable, and energy crashes become more common. Many people begin noticing that they feel sleepy after meals, belly fat accumulates faster, weight loss becomes harder, and hunger becomes more difficult to control, especially after the age of 40 or 50 because aging itself increases the body's vulnerability to chronic inflammation. I often see patients who tell me, "Doctor, I constantly feel swollen. I have no energy anymore," or "My belly fat keeps growing even though I eat carefully." Very often these people have the same combination: chronic stress, poor sleep, an inflammatory diet, and signs of insulin resistance. And this is exactly why nutrition matters so much. The first food is fatty fish, especially wild-caught salmon. And the reason is not only protein. The main benefit comes from omega-3 fatty acids. Omega-3s may help reduce inflammatory signaling inside the body. They influence cell membranes, immune activity, brain health, and insulin sensitivity. Multiple studies and meta-analyses have linked omega-3 intake to lower levels of inflammatory markers such as CRP and inflammatory cytokines. And this becomes especially important after 50 because chronic inflammation accelerates muscle loss, and muscle mass is deeply connected to metabolism, longevity, and healthy aging. Omega-3s are also associated with brain health, and many people living with chronic inflammation describe brain fog, poor concentration, mental fatigue, and reduced cognitive clarity. Practically Practically speaking, 2 to 3 servings of fatty fish per week may already support metabolic and hormonal health significantly. The next food is turmeric, but there is an important detail here. Turmeric by itself is absorbed poorly. That's why it is commonly paired with black pepper, which may increase curcumin bioavailability dramatically. Curcumin has been studied for years because of its potential effects on inflammation, oxidative stress, and metabolic health. Some studies suggest it may support insulin sensitivity and inflammatory balance, but this is important to understand. Turmeric is not magic. One of the biggest problems in modern wellness culture is presenting spices as miracle cures. That is simply not true. Turmeric cannot compensate for poor sleep, fast food, chronic stress, or lack of movement. But as part of a larger anti-inflammatory lifestyle, it may absolutely be useful. For example, adding turmeric to eggs, soups, or morning drinks, ideally together with black pepper. Broccoli, kale, broccoli sprouts, and cauliflower are some of the most powerful foods for metabolic health because they contain compounds associated with supporting detoxification pathways and hormonal metabolism, especially liver pathways involved in processing estrogen metabolites. Cruciferous vegetables are also connected to activation of the body's own antioxidant defense systems. This matters tremendously in chronic inflammation because inflammation almost always comes together with oxidative stress. Oxidative stress damages blood vessels, mitochondria, brain cells, and tissues throughout the body. Practically, you do not need giant salads every day. Even consistently adding broccoli or cruciferous vegetables into your routine may help create a healthier metabolic environment over time. Blueberries, raspberries, and blackberries are not simply healthy desserts. Berries contain anthocyanins, powerful antioxidant compounds associated with protecting cells from inflammatory and oxidative damage. This becomes especially important for blood vessels, the brain, and the pancreas. There is another important advantage. Many people try to eliminate sugar completely, but eventually binge because their diet becomes too restrictive. Berries are a good example of how you can still enjoy food without creating the same level of blood sugar spikes associated with ultra-processed desserts, especially when paired with protein, Greek yogurt, or nuts. Real extra virgin olive oil is one of the most researched foods in the Mediterranean diet. There's a reason Mediterranean-style eating patterns are consistently associated with lower inflammation, better cardiovascular health, and improved metabolic function. One particularly interesting compound is oleocanthal. This compound has been studied for its anti-inflammatory properties. Of course, olive oil is not medication, but replacing ultra-processed fats with high-quality fats may significantly affect long-term inflammation and metabolic health, especially in people struggling with insulin resistance, visceral fat, and chronic fatigue. Sauerkraut, kimchi, plain yogurt, and kefir are becoming increasingly important in modern nutrition research because scientists now understand how closely the gut is connected to the immune system, the brain, inflammation, and even mood regulation. A very large portion of immune activity is connected to the gut. When the microbiome becomes disrupted, inflammatory signaling may increase. Some research has linked impaired gut barrier function, often referred to as leaky gut, with chronic immune activation. This is why fermented foods are receiving so much scientific attention today. But again, it's important not to take this to extremes. You do not need to believe that everything begins in the gut. The goal is simply understanding that gut health is one important part of the larger metabolic picture. Walnuts are another excellent example of a food that supports brain health, vascular health, and metabolic function simultaneously. They contain healthy fats, polyphenols, minerals, and antioxidant compounds. Some studies suggest that regular nut consumption is associated with lower inflammation, better vascular function, and improved cognitive health. Neuroinflammation is now one of the most discussed topics in longevity science because inflammation does not only affect the body, it affects the brain as well. Now here's the most important part. You can add healthy foods while still fueling inflammation every single day. The biggest drivers of chronic inflammation include poor sleep, ultra-processed foods, excess sugar, chronic stress, lack of movement, and constant blood sugar spikes. One of the worst combinations is high stress plus high sugar intake because this combination raises both cortisol and insulin, creating the perfect environment for visceral fat accumulation, metabolic dysfunction, and chronic inflammation. This is where many people make a major mistake. They try to become perfect overnight. They eliminate every bad food, start extreme diets, and obsess over every calorie. But in real life, this rarely works long term. A much better strategy is the 80-20 principle, where the foundation of your diet becomes anti-inflammatory most of the time, while less healthy foods stop being the foundation of your lifestyle. Because health is not built by one superfood. It is built by the direction you move in consistently. Chronic inflammation is not just another trendy internet health term. It is one of the central biological processes connected to hormones, hormones, metabolism, aging, energy, and long-term health. The good news is that nutrition really can influence this process, not through magic and not through detoxes, but through real biological mechanisms. Omega-3s, antioxidants, fiber, gut support, blood sugar stabilization, and reducing inflammatory stress on the body can gradually create a completely different hormonal environment over time. Small decisions repeated consistently can change the way your body functions for years to come. If this video helped you, hit like so YouTube can show it to more people who genuinely need this information. And make sure you subscribe. On this channel, we break down the real science behind hormones, metabolism, cortisol, insulin, healthy aging, and longevity in simple language. This was Dr. Steve. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next video.